Democracy promises government by the people, yet John Stuart Mill warned that unbridled majoritarian rule can become a form of despotism, a tyranny of the majority. When public opinion solidifies into an unquestionable orthodoxy, dissenting voices are silenced, minority rights trampled, and individual autonomy sacrificed on the altar of the common will. Laws and social pressures converge to coerce conformity, undermining the very freedom democracy is meant to protect. To safeguard liberty, we must probe the mechanisms by which majorities impose their will and erect institutional and cultural bulwarks that preserve pluralism, critical thought, and personal integrity. Social coercion through public opinion. John Stuart Mill recognized that tyranny need not wear the mask of legislation. It can emerge organically through social pressures. Public opinion, when united and unexamined, exerts a potent coercive force. Individuals internalize prevailing norms about morality, taste, or acceptable speech, and police one another through gossip, ridicule, and ostracism. A single rumor can circulate swiftly, staining reputations without due process. Social media accelerates this dynamic. A hashtag campaign can mobilize mass shaming in moments, turning one's private missteps into collective punishments. Unlike formal laws, informal sanctions lack transparency and appeal mechanisms. The rules are unwritten, yet universally understood. Step outside the majority's moral compass, and you face whispers, icy silences, or outright denunciation. Such coercion pressures individuals to self-censor, adopting the majority's language and opinions even when privately unconvinced. The fear of exclusion, of losing social capital, friendships, or professional opportunities drives widespread compliance. Mill warned that this despotism of opinion undermines individual development, creativity, unpopular truths, and genuine progress falter when vocal minorities are driven underground. Moreover, social coercion often masquerades as moral consensus. Participants believe they act out of virtue, defending shared values, unaware of how quickly their judgments slip into intolerance. The collective zeal that once mobilized social reforms can devolve into vindictive campaigns that ruin careers or marginalize vulnerable voices. Whenever exchange doubles as a test of orthodoxy, the public square loses its diversity and becomes a chamber of echoes. Countering social coercion demands cultivating independent thought, as Mill advocated, encouraging habits of intellectual humility, recognizing the fallibility of one's views, and institutionalizing spaces for safe dissent are crucial. Online platforms can incorporate features that protect minority viewpoints, such as delaying public judgments or enabling context-rich rebuttals. Civil society groups and professional associations can promote codes of respectful disagreement. By acknowledging the informal yet formidable power of public opinion, democracies can safeguard the conditions for genuine pluralism and the free exchange of ideas. Legislative overreach and uniformity. In representative democracies, the legislature's mandate derives from majority support. Yet unbridled majoritarianism risks translating majority preferences into laws that disregard minority rights and needs. Mill cautioned against legislative despotism, where elected bodies, with the veneer of democratic legitimacy, impose uniform regulations, be they moral prohibitions, speech restrictions, or economic mandates, without sufficiently weighing the interests of smaller groups. Examples abound. Zoning laws rooted in suburban majorities can exclude affordable housing initiatives, trapping low-income families. Cultural majorities may pass statutes limiting language rights for immigrant communities. Religious majorities can enact laws enshrining their moral codes, restricting artistic expression, reproductive autonomy, or LGBTQ+ rights, under the guise of public morality. The cumulative effect is legal uniformity that flattens diversity, forcing minorities to conform or face criminal penalties and social stigma. Unlike informal social coercion, legislative overreach wields coercive power backed by the state's enforcement apparatus. Police, courts, and regulatory agencies translate parliamentary decrees into tangible punishments: fines, imprisonment, or license revocation. These mechanisms leave little room for individualized assessments, treating minority interests as collateral damage. Political majorities, incentivized to deliver benefits to their constituencies, may sidestep deliberative safeguards or sunset provisions, cementing uniform rules until the next electoral shift. Mill recommended institutional guardrails, constitutional bills of rights that entrench fundamental liberties beyond simple majority repeal, supermajority requirements for morally intrusive legislation, and independent judiciaries empowered to strike down discriminatory statutes. Additionally, federalist structures, allocating certain powers to regional governments, allow local majorities to govern themselves while protecting minority groups elsewhere. Legislative overreach becomes less likely when political actors know their decisions will be subject to rigorous, rights-based review and cross-jurisdictional diversity. By embedding such safeguards, democracies can balance the imperative of majority rule with the protection of individual independence and minority flourishing. Uniformity need not be tyranny when tempered by structural checks, deliberative processes, and a commitment to equal respect under the law. Media as majority mouthpiece, mass media, serves as the principal conduit through which public opinion forms and crystallizes. In practice, large-scale news outlets and platform algorithms often reflect and reinforce majority perspectives, creating a feedback loop. Dominant voices gain broader exposure, shaping the perceived center of acceptable discourse. Journalists, advertisers, and media owners cater to the largest audiences, or the most profitable demographics, leading to selective coverage that sidelines minority views or complex analysis in favor of soundbites and sensationalism. This dynamic results in agenda setting. Topics that align with majority interests dominate headlines and primetime segments, while issues affecting marginalized communities receive scant attention. Even public broadcasters, bound by mandates of neutrality, can inadvertently amplify mainstream viewpoints by privileging official sources and expert panels drawn from established power structures. On social platforms, algorithmic curation prioritizes the most engaging content, often the most polarizing or emotionally charged, further entrenching majority narratives and drowning out dissent. Media's majority bias extends to framing. A protest by a small minority may be labeled a riot if it threatens mainstream interests. Conversely, government crackdowns receive subdued scrutiny when backed by popular sentiment. The language choices, illegal, radical, legitimate, shape audience attitudes. Over time, repeated media framing embeds majority moral codes into the public's subconscious, discouraging alternative interpretations. Mill's remedy for media-driven majoritarianism lies in press pluralism and critical media literacy, encouraging diverse ownership models. Community radio, nonprofit outlets, foreign language publications broadens the spectrum of perspectives. Public funding mechanisms can support investigative journalism that examines minority issues without commercial pressure. Educational curricula must equip citizens to recognize framing biases, source-check claims, and actively seek underrepresented viewpoints. Regulatory frameworks can enforce transparency in algorithmic processes and mandate inclusion of minority voices. By democratizing media production and consumption, societies can dismantle the majority mouthpiece effect, ensuring that the public sphere remains a true marketplace of ideas rather than an echo chamber for prevailing orthodoxies. Education and the standardization of thought education systems play a pivotal role in shaping citizens' beliefs and values. As Mill noted, schools and universities often become instruments for transmitting dominant cultural and political ideologies, presenting them as objective truths rather than contested constructs. Curricula prioritize national narratives, establish canons, and prevailing economic or social theories, leaving little room for critical engagement or alternative paradigms. Students learn to accept standardized frameworks, historical interpretations, scientific models, moral codes, without questioning underlying assumptions or exploring minority perspectives. Standardized testing exacerbates this dynamic by rewarding rote memorization of prescribed content over analytical skills. Teachers under pressure to deliver quantifiable outcomes teach to the test, further narrowing intellectual horizons. Academic tenure and departmental politics can discourage faculty from introducing controversial viewpoints for fear of institutional backlash. The hidden curriculum, Time schedules, hierarchical governance, classroom rituals, instills conformity and deference to authority. This standardization of thought perpetuates majoritarian norms. Students internalize authorized interpretations of history, morality, and civic duty, often conflating them with universal principles. The resulting citizenry is literate in dominant discourses but ill-equipped to question systemic biases or to entertain radical alternatives. Intellectual diversity dwindles as social pressure and institutional incentives marginalize maverick scholarship. To counteract this, Mill advocated for educational reforms, emphasizing critical inquiry and breadth of exposure. Liberal education models, core curricula spanning multiple disciplines and perspectives, encourage students to analyze competing theories. Socratic seminar formats foster dialogic learning where students and instructors co-explore ideas. Universities can establish interdisciplinary programs that bring marginalized voices, indigenous studies, feminist theory, critical race studies, into the mainstream curriculum. Assessment methods that value project-based learning, reflective essays, and peer review cultivate independent judgment. By reorienting education toward fostering intellectual autonomy rather than imposing uniform doctrines, societies can nurture citizens capable of resisting the tyranny of majority-defined thought and contributing creatively to public discourse. Party politics and the marginalization of dissent. In many democracies, party politics structures legislative behavior through discipline mechanisms that prioritize majority unity over individual conscience. Two-party systems in particular incentivize strict adherence to party platforms. Deviating from the agreed line risks loss of committee assignments, withdrawal of funding, or deselection by local party organizations. Whip systems. Officials who monitor and enforce voting discipline apply pressure through incentives and sanctions, ensuring that representatives support majority positions even when they conflict with personal convictions or minority interests. This dynamic marginalizes dissent within parties. Backbenchers hesitate to propose alternative policies for fear of career repercussions. Ambitious legislators align their stances with the majority whip count rather than constituency nuance. Minority viewpoints, whether representing demographic subgroups or ideological minorities, struggle to gain traction as the party machinery channels resources toward maintaining electoral viability through uniform platforms. The result is a legislative process that amplifies the tyranny of the majority. Laws drafted with minimal cross-block consensus, limited powers of oversight over executive actions, and symbolic debates that preclude substantive engagement with dissenting ideas. Citizens witness their elected representatives as cogs in partisan machines rather than as independent advocates, fostering public cynicism and disengagement. Mill's solution emphasizes the value of proportional representation in multi-party systems, which reduce the dominance of any single bloc and create incentives for coalition building. When no party can govern alone, legislators must negotiate with diverse partners, bringing minority perspectives into policy deliberations. Whip systems can be moderated by granting free votes on conscience issues and by strengthening select committees with powers to amend bills. Internally, parties can adopt democratic decision-making processes, ranked choice leadership elections, inclusive policy forums, transparent deliberation that embed pluralism within party structures. By reforming party politics to accommodate dissent rather than suppress it, democracies can transform their legislative arenas into platforms for genuine debate and nuanced representation, countering the tyranny of monolithic majorities. Cultural majoritarianism, majoritarian rule, extends beyond politics into culture, shaping which narratives, aesthetics, and traditions gain visibility. Museums curate exhibitions that reflect the heritage of the dominant group, while lesser-known artistic movements struggle for funding and space. Popular entertainment, blockbuster films, chart-topping music, mass-market novels caters to broad tastes, relying on tested formulas to maximize audience appeal. Public monuments and holidays commemorate shared majority histories, relegating minority experiences to niche festivals or specialist venues. Over time, this cultural majoritarianism flattens the landscape, making cultural consumption uniform and marginalizing subcultural innovation. The forces driving cultural majoritarianism are both market-based and institutionally reinforced. Funding bodies, advertisers, and broadcasters prioritize content that resonates with the largest demographics, deeming niche expressions unprofitable. Educational curricula present canonical works, Shakespeare, Beethoven, Homer, as universal touchstones, often without contextualizing alternative traditions. Urban planning designates central public spaces for monuments celebrating majority icons, while ethnic enclaves occupy peripheral zones. Social media algorithms amplify mainstream content through engagement metrics, further diminishing subcultural reach. The consequences are profound. Cultural homogenization stunts creative diversity, reducing the pool of ideas from which society can draw. Subcultures, whether defined by ethnicity, region, or aesthetic preference, lose their platforms, and members internalize messages of inferiority or invisibility. Without representation, marginalized voices struggle to challenge dominant assumptions or to enrich the collective imagination. Counteracting cultural majoritarianism involves proactive pluralism. Arts councils and public broadcasters can allocate quotas for minority-led projects, ensuring protected funding streams. Museums and festivals can adopt rotating curator models, inviting underrepresented communities to co-curate exhibitions. Educational syllabi must integrate global and subcultural literatures, framing canons as evolving dialogues rather than unassailable pillars. Digital platforms can offer subcultural spotlight features, promoting diverse creators regardless of follower counts. By institutionalizing cultural diversity, societies affirm that creativity flourishes in multivocal environments. When subcultural expressions receive genuine recognition, the cultural commons becomes richer, a dynamic ecosystem where minority voices shape the majority's evolving aesthetic and narrative horizons. Economic tyranny of the majority. Economic policies often mirror majority consumption habits, marginalizing specialized or localized demands. Infrastructure investments gravitate toward high-traffic corridors, urban centers, major highways, while rural roads and small-town transit languish. Retail chains stock best-selling national brands, leaving artisanal producers and ethnic grocers on the margins. Subsidies and tax incentives support large-scale agriculture or mass manufacturing, whereas smallholder farms and cottage industries receive scant assistance. This economic tyranny of the majority aligns public investments and market signals with majority preferences, making niche goods cost-prohibitive or inaccessible. Legislators, responding to majority constituencies, enact regulations, zoning codes, licensing requirements, standards that unintentionally burden small enterprises. A health code designed to ensure mass restaurant safety may impose disproportionate costs on food trucks or microbreweries. Intellectual progression regimes favor established corporations, granting them leverage over emerging innovators. Broadband expansion prioritizes densely populated cities, leaving rural communities with inadequate digital access and constraining remote entrepreneurs. The market compounds these imbalances. Economies of scale entice producers to cater exclusively to mainstream tastes, as the cost of diversification, small batch production, specialized distribution, outweigh the limited revenues from niche segments. Retail platforms employ algorithms that spotlight high-velocity products, relegating specialized offerings to the long tail, where discovery requires deliberate searching. Breaking this economic hegemony requires calibrated policy interventions. Governments can establish micro-enterprise grants, low-interest loans, and regulatory fast lanes for small-scale ventures. Public procurement rules can set aside quotas for local artisans, minority-owned businesses, and cooperatives. Zoning and licensing codes can incorporate proportionality clauses, ensuring requirements scale with business size. Broadband subsidies aimed at unserved areas can foster digital entrepreneurship beyond urban centers. On the market side, platform cooperatives, where users and producers share ownership, can realign incentives towards supporting diverse goods. Consumer education campaigns highlighting the value of local and niche products can stimulate demand. Community sedation enterprises, CSAs, co-op grocery stores, maker spaces, embed economic plurality into civic life. By recognizing and addressing the majority's economic tyranny, societies can cultivate vibrant ecosystems where niche needs coexist with mass markets, enriching both producers' opportunities and consumers' choices. Institutional safeguards against majoritarian despotism, John Stuart Mill, recognize that pure majority rule requires checks to protect individual liberties and minority interests. Institutional safeguards play this countervailing role. Judicial review empowers independent courts to strike down legislation or executive actions that violate constitutional guarantees, ensuring that majority-backed laws cannot trample fundamental rights. Federalism, dividing authority across national and subnational levels, enables regions to tailor policies to local minority preferences, creating policy laboratories and preventing uniform impositions. Bills of rights or charters enshrine intractable protections, freedom of expression, conscience, assembly, requiring supermajorities or referendums to amend, shielding minorities from transient majoritarian whims. Each mechanism addresses distinct vulnerabilities. Judicial review counters legislative overreach by interpreting constitutional principles. It protects free speech even when unpopular. Federalism dilutes central power, preventing a single majority coalition from dictating national norms, while granting minorities representation in regional governments. Bills of rights articulate inviolable standards that define the permissible scope of democratic decisions, ensuring that basic liberties remain out of legislative reach. The effectiveness of these safeguards depends on structural design and political culture. Courts require insulation from partisan pressures. Through life tenure, transparent appointment processes, and norms of judicial independence. To resist majoritarian capture, federal arrangements benefit from revenue sharing and institutional support, so subnational units have the capacity to govern effectively. Bills of rights flourish when citizens understand their enforcement mechanisms, ombudspersons, human rights commissions, constitutional complaints procedures, and feel empowered to invoke them. Equally crucial is the public's commitment to constitutionalism. Civics education, media literacy, and civic rituals before oaths, flag ceremonies, legislative debates reinforce the normative weight of rights and the legitimacy of counter-majoritarian bodies. Civil society organizations play watchdog roles, publicizing rights violations and mobilizing support for institutional checks. By embedding these multi-layered safeguards, democracies can channel the vitality of majority rule while preventing its descent into despotism, preserving a balanced system where liberty and equality co-evolve. Cultivating the independent mind mill's ideal citizen is a critical thinker, resilient against the smothering pressure of public opinion. Cultivating such independence requires deliberate practices, intellectual pluralism, regularly engage with diverse sources, books, podcasts, and debates representing multiple perspectives. Seek healthy disagreement in reading lists and social circles. Reflective habits. Integrate reflective writing, journals, or blogs to process reactions to majority trends. Before endorsing popular views, articulate counterpoints and assess evidence. Dialogue over debate. Foster conversational spaces where participants share experiences and test assumptions without adversarial stakes. Facilitate devil's advocate roles to surface hidden biases. Critical media consumption. Apply frameworks for source evaluation. Consider authors' backgrounds, funding, and potential biases. Use fact-checking tools and follow Minority Report journalism. Ethical anchoring. Develop a personal values statement, revisited periodically. When confronted with prevailing sentiments, compare proposed actions against core principles. Community of inquiry. Join or start reading groups, discussion salons, or philosophical cafes that prize open-ended inquiry over predetermined outcomes. Educational models. Advocate for pedagogies that emphasize Socratic questioning, project-based learning, and epistemological awareness rather than rote memorization. Mindfulness practices. Techniques such as meditation or contemplative walks cultivate self-awareness, allowing recognition of emotional contagion and peer pressure impulses. By weaving these strategies into daily life, individuals build cognitive immunity to the tyranny of the majority, sustaining personal judgment and fostering a public sphere rich in independent thought. Toward deliberative pluralism offers a democratic alternative that marries majority rule with robust engagement across differences. Core features include inclusive forums, citizens' assemblies, randomly selected panels, and participatory budgeting give minorities direct voice. Structured facilitation ensures that all participants, regardless of status, can contribute equally. Reason-giving requirements. Legislative proposals and policy platforms must include public justifications, citing evidence and outlining minority impact. Deliberative processes encourage mutual persuasion rather than adversarial sloganeering. Consensus-seeking procedures. Tools like multi-voting, 90% threshold passes, or qualified majority rules promote broadly acceptable outcomes rather than simple majorities.